He is the British government minister charged with developing new trade relationships with this country after Brexit. He was one of the original Brexiteers, advocating that the UK should leave both the single market and the EU's customs union. But some people have accused him of peddling a false dream, which threatens the future economic health of this country, as well as its standing on the world stage. I'm Simon McGregor-Wood, talking to the Secretary of State for International Trade, Dr. Liam Fox, one-on-one.
A negotiation with the European Union will need to begin under a new Prime Minister. And I think it's right that this new Prime Minister takes the decision about when to trigger Article 50 and start the formal and legal process of leaving the EU.
We were warned that Britain would face some sort of economic Armageddon if we decided to vote to leave the European Union. We were told unemployment would rise. We've added 600,000 jobs to our economy. We now have the highest level of employment of all time, a 43-year low in unemployment. Last year we had more investment projects land in the UK than any year in our history.
Brexit in the form that it was promised to the British people, it's simply undeliverable.
We will be leaving the customs union. We want to ensure that we can have an independent trade policy. We're committed to delivering on our commitment of no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, and ensuring we have as frictionless trade as possible with the European Union.
What we've said is we want a full, open, liberal and comprehensive trading relationship with the European Union. It's the European Union who've said Britain can't get the same benefits as it currently has because other countries might then want to leave.
We both need to face the fact that this is a negotiation.
This needs to be a Brexit that's not about the ideology of the Commission, but it's about the economic welfare of our citizens.
The truth is this country needs a new approach to Brexit that a Tory government simply cannot deliver.
This is not just a UK-EU issue, but this is a wider global issue. You have to understand the strategic importance of Turkey to the United Kingdom.
We have agreed that we will have a joint working group to prepare the ground for our post-Brexit trading relationship.
Throughout the negotiations that Turkey was having with the European Union, Britain was the strongest advocate of Turkish membership. We see the relationship not as simply being an economic one, but a deeper, longer term, more strategic relationship. To understand how important Turkey is in the geopolitical sense, try to imagine if it wasn't there.
Secretary of State, thank you very much for joining us for this one-on-one. I think, give or take a few days, it's 2 years since the Brexit referendum. We voted to leave. You supported that. How's it gone, the process since then?
Well, if you remember, at the time of the referendum, we were warned that Britain would face some sort of economic Armageddon if we decided to vote to leave the European Union. We were told unemployment would rise, investment would disappear from the UK, that our economy would slide into recession. What in fact we've seen is that we've added 600,000 jobs to our economy. We now have the highest level of employment of all time, a 43-year low in unemployment. Last year we had more investment projects land in the UK than any year in our history. Our exports are up about 10% in both goods and services, and more tech investment came to London last year than the whole of France, Germany, Spain and Ireland combined. So it's hardly been the economic wreckage that was predicted. In fact, the economy is in good shape. In terms of the negotiations, obviously they are ongoing and we await the next iteration of the European Council. And we, as a department, the new Department for International Trade, is preparing for how we exercise an independent trade policy for the first time in over 40 years, including taking up an independent seat at the WTO.
You are familiar, of course, that despite what you've said, both domestically and certainly in European capitals and in Brussels, there is a growing sense of impatience that the British have yet to define what they want to achieve from the negotiations. How would you respond to that criticism?
What we've said is we want a full, open, liberal and comprehensive trading relationship with the European Union. The question is really the other way around, because we want to maintain the economic relationship we have at the present time. It's the European Union who've said Britain can't get the same benefits as it currently has because other countries might then want to leave. We think that this needs to be a Brexit that's not about the ideology of the Commission, but it's about the economic welfare of our citizens. And there's an added element which will be understood in Turkey as well as outside other places outside the European Union. If we introduce, for what would be political reasons, any impediments to trade and investment inside Europe that don't exist today, it will send a signal to international investors that Europe is less open for business than it is today, and there are lots of other places that international investors can take their money.
This week, if we needed any evidence of the fact that your government is rather divided on the issue of what it wants to achieve as the end state, is a reminder perhaps that you are, within your party, within your political affiliations, all at sea, really, in terms of what the final achievement should be.
No, we're very clear that what we want is an open, liberal, comprehensive trading agreement with Europe. We want to maintain our security relationship with Europe. But again, it's the European Union that's said things like Britain shouldn't be part of Galileo because we couldn't be a trusted partner if we were outside the European Union. As the single biggest military power, for example, inside the European Union, we regard that as a ridiculous view to take. So we want to move forward. You're correct that in the British Parliament there remain a division of opinion, but then the United Kingdom split on the issue, and how we handle the legislation was always going to be difficult for a government that had no overall majority in the House of Commons, but we have support from other parties who themselves have difference of opinion on the issue.
There's been a lot of recent focus also on the question of the Irish border, with all sides to the negotiations agreeing that there should be no return of the hard border. How can you manage that if, as I think you are determined to leave both the single market and the customs union?
Well, we're looking at ways that can be done in practice to do that. And if you look at the way that global trade is moving, then there's an increased use of electronic documentation, of inspection in market rather than at the border, and of using technology and mutual recognition agreements to ensure that we get proper standards and verification of agreements. Now, that is actually not an EU-UK issue, because that's what we're all signed up to under the Trade Facilitation Agreement, which we all agreed at the WTO last year. So that is the direction of travel that we need to move in the whole of the global economy in terms of reducing friction at borders. The question is how best we apply that using either technical arrangements or new technology at the Irish border. We've made it very clear that we want to see as frictionless trade as possible at the Irish border, but we also want to have an independent trade policy for the United Kingdom, which means leaving the customs union.
But on that issue, some of the ideas that you've been coming up with, and they're creative and complex, and some of them necessarily haven't been worked through fully yet, but the reception from the Commission and others has been cool so far, hasn't it? They're not convinced by these technological solutions.
Well, the reaction has been pretty cool to most of the things that we've proposed so far, and a lot of them have then become accepted. And I think people forget that this is a negotiation, and no one's likely to give an upfront agreement on practically any issue. But we do think that this is not just a UK-EU issue, as I say, but this is a wider global issue. How do we make trade freer? How do we make border crossings simpler? How do we use technology? If you look at companies like UPS, for example, They are the world's biggest customs clearance house. How do we use technology to help small companies be able to get into international trade in a way that they are not at the moment? So people tend to see this as a problem. I see it as an opportunity for us to future-proof the relationships we have in terms of customs.
In terms of the opportunities, and I guess you've got the opportunity brief in terms of drumming up trade, new relationships around the world. How is that going? And can you give us an insight into what trade deals we can expect to be announced in the coming weeks and months?
There is a rather technical process we have to go through. First of all, at the World Trade Organization in Geneva, we have to have new trade schedules, effectively the terms and conditions of our trading, which have to be laid down. We are members of the WTO in our own right, but we have always traded under the EU schedules. We will need to set out our own schedules so that countries that might want to do a trade agreement with us know what they're buying into. That's number one. Number two is we will want to get continuity agreements where the UK is the member of a trade agreement by virtue of our EU membership at the present time. What we have agreed with the EU is that we will have an implementation period where those agreements are automatically rolled over, and that gives us an opportunity during that space up till the end of 2020 to get more bespoke arrangements. Why would we want more bespoke? Because there are things that we might be able to do outside the European Union that we can't do inside. And we'll be looking and exploring with our trading partners what those might be.
When you visit foreign capitals, as you do on a frequent basis, what's the reception like? Is it great you've left, let's talk business, or is it, well, we'd rather you stayed because it's easier to do business with the whole of the EU?
Well, I would say it's enormously variable depending how far away you are from the epicenter of Brussels. For many European countries, naturally they wish the United Kingdom had stayed, although some of them understand why. I spoke to a number of bankers in Frankfurt, for example, who said to me, we understand why you made the decision that you did, and in your position we might have done the same thing. We just don't think you did the right thing for us, which is why we're a bit cross about it. So I understand all that. We are generally very welcomed wherever we are. We are the world's 5th biggest economy. People want to do business with the United Kingdom. They want to have investment in and from the United Kingdom.
But it's going to take time, isn't it, to pin these deals down?
Well, we already have very strong investment relations. For example, if you look at the UK's relationship with the United States, which is one of the areas where we would want to look for a new free trade agreement where none exists, because, as you know today, the EU doesn't have a trade agreement with China or the United States or India or the Gulf, some of the world's biggest markets. But if you look at our relationship with the United States, we have $1 trillion invested in one another's economy. So it's the investment relationship which is hugely important, as well as the trading relationship, and in fact is what gives it some strength and stability. So what I think has happened with the Brexit referendum is twofold. Number one, it's woken up Britain's interest in the rest of the world, which I think explains why we've seen such an upswing in our exports. On the day of our referendum, we were exporting 28.8% of our GDP. We're now exporting 30.5%, which is quite a big increase in that length of time. But I think it's also awoken interest in the United Kingdom overseas. That's why I think you've seen the big increase in investment into the United Kingdom in recent times. We also ask our investors outside Europe, why do you want to come to the United Kingdom? Why put your money in Britain? And it's very interesting that we get a great consistency of answers. What they will say is, number one, your legal system. We understand it. It's predictable, fair and equitable. Number two, you have a flexible workforce, by which they mean flexible labour laws as well. A predictable regulatory framework, a low tax economy, some of the world's top universities, great access to tech, good IP protection, and of course we speak English. Now, not a single one of those is dependent on our membership of the European Union.
Turning to Turkey, the President of Turkey was here quite recently. I think you were part of the hosting team. Lots of optimistic noises about a new relationship there. How deep and meaningful might that new relationship be?
Well, I think to be able to answer that question, you have to understand the strategic importance of Turkey to the United Kingdom. And of course, throughout the negotiations that Turkey was having with the European Union, Britain was the strongest advocate of Turkish membership. We see the relationship not as simply being an economic one, but a deeper, longer term, more strategic relationship. And I generally say to people, to understand how important Turkey is in the geopolitical sense, try to imagine if it wasn't there, and what the interface would be with some of the countries around it. So Turkey was a great partner during the Cold War, a role that many seem to have forgotten. It's very, very important in terms of its geographical positioning. It's a large growing population with a young population and a growing middle class, which makes it both a good partner for exporting, but also a potentially good place to invest for British companies and from which to get investment from Turkey. So you can see that the trade relationship can strengthen as well as the investment relationship. And we've seen big increases in British exports to Turkey in recent years, some of the biggest increases, in fact, of any country that we trade with. So that's looking very positive. And then we will want, first of all, to get a continuity agreement as we move into the next period, as we leave the European Union, but we remain in the implementation period. And then we will want to see how we get a more bespoke agreement. We have a trade working group at the present time, which is looking at the parameters and exploring the areas where we might be able to do more than we do today.
Your colleague, the Foreign Secretary, spoke controversially, not aware that he was being recorded perhaps, about the need for a crisis, or the possibility of a crisis in the talks with the EU, and that would be okay. Do you subscribe to that view? Do you think we should provoke some kind of crisis in the talks to get to the main point at the heart of the matter?
I think we need to get a successful outcome, and that's what we should be aiming at. We don't need to get the quickest, we need to get the best. And I think that we need to understand that...
but there is a deadline, isn't there? It's not as if it's open-ended.
There is, of course, there's a deadline. And as with most negotiations, I think you can expect more things to happen closer to the end than at the beginning of the process. But I think the European Union also needs to understand, while we understand the reasons that they might be unhappy that we're leaving, they also need to understand that we have a right to leave. It is a right that was written into the Lisbon Treaty, a right that was underpinned by all other 27 members, that if any one country wanted to leave, it had the right to do so, and a right to expect the cooperation of others in that process. I think by understanding both of those things and by keeping them in balance, then I think we get the right approach in how we get to this separation. But remember, we're leaving the European Union, we're not leaving Europe. We're still going to be, for example, Germany's biggest trading partner in Europe. We're still one of the world's top economies. We are the biggest military force in Europe. And those relationships will continue. So people, I think, need to get a bit of a sense of perspective.
Have you been surprised by the attitude of the EU? Did you expect to get away with more when this process started?
No, I expected the European Union to drive a hard bargain. But they also need to remember that the United Kingdom is a very important trading partner, and the European Union has a trade in goods surplus with the United Kingdom of almost £100 billion. Any restriction that is placed on trade would actually be very disadvantageous for those companies in Europe who trade and export goods to the United Kingdom. If the recent American tariff episode has taught us anything, it is that we are far better off with an open, liberal trading environment. Not only is that the best way to give our people prosperity, but that prosperity underpins social and political cohesion, which is the building block of our collective security. And that, in a global trading sense, is why it's very important that countries like the United Kingdom and Turkey stand together.
Can I just ask you one very quick question as a final shot? If we had another referendum tomorrow, do you think there would be the same popular support for Brexit, given that all that's happened, or all that hasn't happened, in the last 2 years?
What's very interesting is how little movement there's been in opinion polls on this subject. I'm more convinced that we're right to leave than I was on the day that I voted to leave. And I imagine that that view has been shared by others.
Dr. Liam Fox, thank you very much for talking to us.